it's not stubbornness, it's not hubris, it's not ego. You truly believe that you're still on the cusp of something great, then don't stop. The worst thing that can happen is that you'll be wrong and you'll lose some money. That's the worst thing that can happen. And don't die wondering. The idea that we can celebrate victory, but we're not satisfied because we want to go again and we want to go again and we want to go again. That kind of unstoppable force requires some combination of smarts, energy, and an enormous amount of resilience.
How do you stay clear-headed in the moments when all your brain wants to do is spiral and you want to run away?
They have a routine. They have a practice of some description that they return to still their mind, to tune out the stress, to reground them. They also have the benefit of a very clear purpose. Money goes up and down, people come and go, the great high turns into the nightmare high. These things are inevitable. And in fact, I actually think they're pretty damn important to maturing as a leader. If you give up, if you capitulate, if you surrender, you will never respect yourself ever again.
All right, guys, welcome back to another episode. We had Josh Sparks on the podcast again today. It's the second time we've had him on. The first time we had an amazing response. And I think this conversation was definitely better. It was another level above. Now, the stuff that we talked through on this episode is going to blow your mind. It's going to flip your perspectives and going to help you get to that next stage of growth, whether you're stuck starting and you can't figure out how to get your butt into gear, or you're at $10 million and you want to go to 50. It's going to help everyone at every stage level up. And you're going to face some hard truths hearing this podcast as well. So I know you guys are going to love it. We'll get into the podcast in a second, but before we do, can I please ask for a few favors? If you're watching this on YouTube, can you please like this video? It takes 1 second, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. As you would have seen, the podcast is on fire. We've had so many amazing guests over the last couple of months, and trust me, I've seen the guests we have booked. There are more to come, so please subscribe if you haven't already. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, if you could leave me a 5-star review, I just want you to know it really helps me out and it really helps the podcast grow. And the bigger and better the podcast gets, the more consistently we're able to have guests like Josh come on and deliver you guys fire value. So that's enough from me. Thank you to everyone that's been doing it. It doesn't go unnoticed. Thank you so much. Let's get into the podcast.
All right, we're back with another awesome episode. The string of our guests we've had over the last month or so has been mind-blowing. So thank you to Joe, our producer, for booking all these amazing guests. Now, we've got Josh Sparks back for part 2. Now, the feedback off your first episode, which was probably between a year and 18 months ago, time flies, was really, really good. I think you're one of the first people that I had in that wasn't just from the e-com startup world, that had some, more corporate, bigger business, $100 million business experience. And I think some of the lessons, the things we got to speak about really were the first time a lot of people were hearing it. So we got a really good response to that. So I know this episode is going to be awesome. For those that don't know Josh or didn't listen to that first episode, we go through his story in that one. So go back and have a listen to this when you finish this episode. We go through more his personal journey. We're not really going to do this episode. We've kind of been there. I want to touch on a few different topics and have discussions around different things. Right. One of them is going to be like spirituality and business, because I know that's like a big journey you've gone on and invested a lot of time. And it's something I'm personally really curious about as well. But a little intro into Josh for those that don't already know who he is. So he's a man with a very brilliant business acumen, but a CV to match. So some of the things he does, he was the CEO of Sass Bide for 5 years at the peak of their powers. Mel, again, was just talking about that before we started recording. She was one of the peak prime ones that were like so into Sass Bide. He was also the CEO of designer fashion brand, Thom Browne. He was the MD of Urban Outfitters and the head of innovation and growth at MJ Bale, just to name a few that the Aussies would really know. And currently he's the founder and principal consultant at boutique management consultancy firm Together Studio. Essentially a fancy way of saying he tells really smart people what to do with their businesses and how to make them better. So Josh Sparks, welcome, brother. I really appreciate you coming in again. I'm really looking forward to it.
Mate, thank you so much for having me. What an intro.
I try my best.
It's an honor to be back. Thank you.
As I said, it was really fun, and the response was really overwhelmingly positive from that last one. So I was always knowing we'd get you back in. We'll try and make these like an annual episode and just get into your mind. So as I said, I wanted to start with the whole spirituality piece, because I know you've done a lot of like spiritual growth as well. And I'm a big believer that sort of goes hand in hand with business. Yes. But where I wanted to start was a quote from another guest we have coming on soon. You're probably aware of him. We've had him on the podcast soon, Jack Delosa.
Yes.
He has a quote, because I've got an episode with him coming up soon. I was preparing for him and it really stuck into my head. And it's that entrepreneurship is a spiritual endeavor.
Yes.
I just love, no specific question, love to hear your thoughts on that with relation to your experience through life, business and personal growth.
What a question. What an opener.
I know, we get right into it these days.
I love
no
it.
more warming in. Tell me how you started.
No more bio.
We've been
Straight
there.
in.
We've been there.
I think it's a fantastic question because I agree completely. No, I think I've been quite inspired by Zen specifically. And in Zen, there is no distinction between the spiritual and the material. So this whole notion of, chop wood, carry water, everything we do is an act of spirit. I really very firmly believe that work, the whole idea of work-life balance is kind of odd to me because I don't see them as any way separated. I think the way that we express our higher self, our higher purpose, and the way that we creatively express that through our work, it really defines us. And the greatest fulfillment I think you can possibly get in work is when it is a genuine expression of your higher purpose. So leveraging imagination, leveraging creativity, driving innovation, that is all an expression of us tapping into our higher consciousness. And that if we, again, whether you kind of, Buddhist inclined, Christian, Jewish, Islamic, it doesn't really matter. And indeed, if you're agnostic or atheist, you could lean into the quantum theory of mind and you'd end up in the same place. And that is that when we are in what we might call a flow state, we are tapping into our highest potential, right? We're tapping into our highest self. If we then express that through our work, it is an act of spiritual worship to a certain extent. It's a way of tapping into, and call it the universe if you hate all the religious stuff.
Yeah.
But whether you're talking about prayer or you're talking about meditation or you're talking about manifestation, or if all of that feels a bit too woo-woo, even those amongst us that aren't into that idea of thinking will have experienced a flow state at some point in time where the ideas just come and it feels like you are an antenna receiving a signal from somewhere outside your skull. And the more that we read and understand about that quantum theory of mind or the Jungian approach to psychology, or indeed the way religions talk about our spirit is that the Zen talk about we're not the wave, we're the ocean. So for a brief period of time, we think we're the wave. And Alan Watts talks about this a lot. He's like, for a brief period of time, it's like, hey, here I am. I'm an individual wave. Ultimately, we've never lost connection to the ocean. We just have a brief flirtation with individuality. And the question then becomes, how are we going to use that? And if it is an act of creative expression, if our work is an act of expressing our higher selves, then it naturally becomes a spiritual exercise.
At what moment did this light bulb go off in your mind? Because you were like working in New York, CEO of these like $100 million businesses. Usually people think of like $100 million CEOs in New York. It's the Patrick Bateman, what's the movie? American Psycho. They don't really talk about spirituality in this sort of way. At what moment did this come into your life?
I think that most people still don't, even though they're experiencing it. So I think for a lot of people, it's a taboo topic. We're not meant to talk about any kind of spiritual reflection or spiritual experience when we're talking about money. They're meant to be different things. But like I said, that Zen notion of there is no distinction between the spiritual and material, we are all one and this is it, basically. I think for me, it has been a process of observing the incredible creatives that I've had the pleasure of working with. And that notion of just watching someone create an entire collection or a new scent or an eyewear frame or an app. And it's coming from somewhere outside of them. And watching those moments of inspiration happen consistently for certain individuals, and then their ability to translate that, to manifest it into a physical product or a service, it just led me on this. I'm very curious by nature, and it led me on a line of inquiry that ultimately led to a Zen school that I attended for a little while, and then just did a bunch of reading. But it's also connecting dots because for me, I was always fascinated with psychology as well, and I was particularly attracted to the Jungian school and this notion of the collective subconscious. And then more recently, and I started reading about quantum physics ages ago. I couldn't understand 99% of it, but it was fascinating.
Yeah.
And more recently, this notion that the quantum theory of mind, that at higher states of consciousness, what you might call flow states, the brain is acting as a quantum computer and all the rules of quantum physics apply. In other words, you are connected to everything, everywhere, all at once. And if you have the presence, if you have the stillness to tap into that, then extraordinary things are possible. So for me, it was about observation. I mean, I was seeing it in action. I just couldn't quite articulate what I was seeing. So then that led me on a line of inquiry that took me to religion, but it also took me to spirituality more broadly, ultimately psychology, quantum physics, and you just start connecting the dots. It's like, okay, whether you are scientifically inclined, whether you're interested in psychology, or whether you're spiritually or religiously inclined, they're all kind of saying the same thing. And that is that we have no idea what we're capable of unless we give ourselves the time, the space, and the stillness to tap into our true imagination, our creative potential.
You're someone that has like a lot of structures and frameworks, right? So my question is, because you're naturally curious, like you said, you're observing things around and things aren't adding up, so you're looking for another way to define them. But I think more and more am I hearing, obviously now I have the podcast, I'm having these conversations, you know, really successful entrepreneurs talking about working with therapists and mindset coaches and things like that. The way that do you have a structured approach to the work that you do, like the inner work that you do? Or is it, you know, intuitively, I feel like spending a little bit of time on this and then I'll drift in and out? Or do you have a bit of a structured way that you like to approach inner work and spiritual growth?
Great question. For myself or for clients?
For yourself.
So yes, I do, but I would say it's pretty loose in so much as I have things I keep returning to, things that consistently work for me. So I'll talk about those first, and then I'll talk about different options around that. I find meditation incredibly difficult and incredibly good. So I'm not good at it at all. And I know.
What does meditation mean to you? When you say
that's
it
where I
means
was about
different
to
things.
go.
Yeah.
That's exactly where I was about to go. Because when I say I'm not good at it, my understanding now is very different to where I began. So when I first started, I thought it was about emptying the mind. What I now understand is that it is about not attaching to what is going through the mind. So you recognize, you acknowledge thoughts and emotions that they arise, and you let them go. So it's that whole notion. I mean, what we're aiming for is we don't want to attach. So the idea is that clinging or that attaching to an idea or a thought or emotion, positive or negative, things that happen in the past, things that might happen in the future, that Zen idea that, and this is really more of a spiritual idea more broadly, that yesterday is a figment of your imagination, tomorrow is a figment of your imagination, and all you have is the eternal now. And in the eternal now, it is a utter waste of time to worry about what happened yesterday or what might happen tomorrow. And sort of cultivating that stillness for me is really hard because I have a super active mind.
Yeah,
but
me too.
I just try to let go for a little while. I've also experimented with other ways of achieving a similar state because I am so easily distracted. My brain goes a million miles an hour. I've taken up guitar. I am the world's worst guitar player. I have a very patient teacher. I am like 5 years into it and I'm still trying to figure out bar chords. So I won't be playing on stage anytime soon. But a positive byproduct of being so completely deficient is that I have to focus. I can't think about anything else. And the guitar gives me instant feedback. If my mind's drifting and I miss a chord or I fludge a note or whatever, there's no pretending that my mind was where it should be. So I think there are traditional approaches like meditation or if you're inclined, prayer, those kinds of things. But there's also other ways to get there. I've got friends who are mad surfers and they tell me that they achieve a similar state. They can't be contacted. The phone is not ringing. Their watch is not buzzing. They're in the ocean. They're feeling this incredible connection with the power of the ocean. And they're tapped into what's happening in the natural environment around them because they have to be to enjoy what they're doing. So I think there's lots of ways to get there, but the most consistent for me are a daily meditation practice, which I'm, as I said, I would not say that I'm the, you know, when they hook those Zen guys or monks up to ECGs and their brain goes into a completely different state. Their heart rate slows to 30 beats. That's not me.
Yeah, no. my mind, I feel like my mind races more. So let me ask you this off the back of that. In particularly of being like living in the entrepreneurial world for, you know, as many years as you have, more and more society, we're living in an outcome-based society. We're always thinking of what's next and what else I want to build and, you know, what else I can do for my business. How do you then find the moments to just focus on being present? Like you said, yesterday was a figment of your imagination, so is tomorrow. In a world that's so high-paced and you've got that busy mind, how do you keep bringing yourself back to presence? like to that present moment. Let's just say, yes, you do your meditation in the morning or the evening, whenever it is, but how do you, because those moments where like the most pure bliss, happiness moments in my life are when you like, it might only last an hour or it might be 4 hours at dinner with friends and you realized, oh my God, I did not think of one other thing apart was exactly what was right in front of me.
Yeah.
And that is fulfillment. That is happiness.
Yes.
But it's harder and harder to do. What's your method in order to do that? I completely butchered that word.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. I know exactly what you mean. I think what you've identified there is a natural contradiction between what I have just suggested and running a business. Because we're planning a year out, 2 years out, 3 years out. We're thinking about our sales last week and last year compared to this week.
Yes.
So I think you kind of, the way I approach it, I'm sure there's lots of other ways, but the way I approach it is I try to gamify it a little bit. Like I literally think of it as a game or a play where the only thing I can impact is right now. I'm very clear on that. At the same time, I have reference points from what happened in the past, and I have ambitions for what we might achieve collectively as a business or me individually for the future. The difference to me is not attaching to a specific outcome and knowing that there are many, many roads to Rome. And all I can influence is what we're doing right now today.
That's great. Yeah.
So you have that strategic clarity. This is where we want to get to, but we have a degree of tactical agility to understand that right now, here today, I can do anything. And if it's directed towards that strategic outcome, then the chances are pretty good that it will progress me a little bit further. It might be as much as I want. It might not be quite as much as I want, but all I can actually do is right here, like right now today.
What do you think impacts your ability to do that? Is it self-worth? Is it runs on the board? Is it just trusting the process? What do you think gives you the ability and the power to sit in that with confidence?
Very old age. You do actually. There is something, and this is weird because I realize I'm not 100 years old, but there is something that comes with having seen it many times before.
True.
The pattern recognition that it's never quite as good as you think it is, and it's never ever as bad as you think it is. And there's a certain stoic element to that as well.
Yes.
We can get into that later, but just being a little bit still and being a little bit calm tends to bring greater results in my experience than attaching to, oh my God, everything's awesome, or oh my God, we're all going to die. This is terrible. It's just trying to be steady in the moment. And I mean, there's been a lot of poems and a lot of literature and a lot of religious verses written about this. If you can remain calm when all those amongst you are losing their minds, then you tend to make better decisions. And they could be losing their minds in a positive sense because they're really happy and they think that their hubris takes over and they think they're going to conquer the world. Or they could be losing their minds because things have got difficult. But either way, that moment's going to pass. And it's about positioning yourself optimally for what's going to come next. And the steadier of mind you are, the steadier of spirit and emotion you are, I guarantee you'll make smarter and better decisions.
Is stoicism something that you consciously try and implement more into your life, or is it just something that you're aware of? For me, again, I could probably do with more stoicism in my life. I'm a very emotional, energetic, enthusiastic person, which doesn't really align perfectly with stoicism. I know I definitely have more room for it. But I also feel like this, and it's probably tied to my ADHD, becomes like my superpower. But where do you align with the stoicism? Some people love it. Some people hate it. Where does that align with your cross-section of beliefs?
I think it's a beautiful approach. I am more like you than a traditional stoic. I'm naturally very high energy. I'm an optimist by nature. I tend to have to spend more time thinking or reminding myself that things aren't as good as I think they are. Like I'm an optimist by nature. So I think stoicism is something that I greatly admire. It's not something I would claim to practice. I'm probably more, and by the way, I mentioned Zen before. A lot of people don't appreciate that. Zen's a philosophy. You can be Christian and Zen. You can be Jewish and Zen. You can be Muslim and Zen.
How would you describe Zen, the philosophy, for people that aren't exactly sure? I know people know the connotation to Zen, but in your own words, how would you describe what that entails?
Well, the best description I can think of was from Suzuki, the famous Zen monk who ultimately settled in San Francisco. He summarized Zen in 2 words, which was everything changes. And I just think that's a wonderful thing to keep in mind. If it's bad, it's going to get better. If it's good, it's probably going to get bad. So don't attach too much. Just do the best you can do. That whole chop wood, carry water thing.
Yeah.
Do it with the completely full. In other words, everything you can bring to the task at hand is what you need to bring to the task at hand, which is why I think multitasking is complete bullshit. And there's, the book Deep Work, there's been a lot of thought around that and a lot of discussion around that. But if you can apply yourself fully, mind, body, spirit, the full spectrum of your emotional capacity, et cetera, to the task at hand, A, it's a lot more fulfilling.
Yeah.
And B, you'll do much better work.
100%. I think as well with entrepreneurs, like you don't do your best deep work when half of your brain is still thinking about all those other things you need to do. The question I want to ask off the back of that is, there's got to be a couple people, or at least one person listening to this that really struggling at the moment. They feel like they're drowning in this startup that they've created. And that messy headspace you can get in as an entrepreneur at times, particularly if it's your first 5 years in business and you haven't gone through and seen the cycles and everything that bad gets better and you don't have that perspective.
Yes.
What's one thing you'd love to say to them, or one thing you'd love for them to understand that you think can help them get them through this mentally?
For me, when things get really tricky, there's a few things I do. The first thing I do is I go back to my higher purpose. Like, why did I do this in the first place? What inspired me to start on this journey? What impact was I hoping to make on the world? What benefit am I bringing to my tribe of customers? And if that higher purpose is a true higher purpose, it's at least to you, because that's all that matters. Like your higher purpose could be completely different to mine. But if you have created a business out of a sense that you have something incredibly important to say to the world, you're going to say it and you're going to enroll a whole tribe of followers to go on this journey with you, then simply going back to the genesis, like back to the beginning of your journey can be really uplifting. The second thing I do, because that's all well and good, but you're still facing, you've got enemies on all fronts, things are going bad, cash flow is awful, the money's going out of the bank. The other thing I look for is proof points. So it's all very well to say I had a higher purpose and I completely believe in it and I want to create a tribe of raving fans around me. But am I delusional? Like, is this actually working? Do I have any proof that this thesis has any value at all? So by going back to proof points, and that can be as simple as scrolling through some of your customer feedback. It can be looking at the DMs you get on social. Better yet, actually talk to some real people. Go and talk to the people who are engaged with your product or service and ask them how it's changing their life. And that is so energizing because there's always haters, but you've got a core group of people who would be absolutely distraught and distressed if you stopped doing what you're doing. And when you talk to them, and it's super energizing.
I want to ask you about that higher purpose piece because I know there's a belief that you have in business, and I think you might have mentioned it's the first time we spoke, and I definitely agree with it and can relate to it, that most, like 99% of entrepreneurs want to be an entrepreneur and start a business to get something they didn't have or prove something to themselves or someone else that they can be this thing. It always, a lot of the times it starts from that lack of and that chip on your shoulder.
Yes.
For you, what's your journey been like? Because I'm sure that's what motivated you at the start. It's what motivated me, but it has to grow and change. What's the journey like of growing and evolving that? And what are some mental models you can give to people that are at that cycle where they're not motivated by those original things anymore and they need to find that deeper, higher purpose?
So I think it's a great question. I think that most of us start off wanting to prove something to someone, often ourselves, that we're better than they think we are, that we're more worthy, that we deserve love, that we deserve success, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that is incredibly motivating for a while.
Yeah.
That kind of fear-based motivation is very powerful. But the propellant, that rocket fuel, it burns hot and it burns fast. And when you first encounter success or when you first encounter failure, you can find yourself second guessing that motivation. Success can be as dangerous as failure in that sense. I think you have to ultimately connect to something bigger than fear. And that's where that higher purpose starts to come in. And I use the term a lot, and I'm sure it sounds like a total cliche, but I mean it very sincerely. If you have a sense of why you were put on earth and the contribution that you can make to your fellow man, and I mean, that could be anything. That could be, you could be selling a product or a service of any description. If you started the business consciously thinking you were doing it to prove something, subconsciously there was more going on. And as the journey continues, you find that the desire to prove something to someone else or yourself, and the desire to, paper your walls with $100 bills becomes less satisfying. You start to question what it's all about.
Yep.
And you meet a lot of people like this who reach a point of success and they start asking themselves, well, is this it? Is this what it's, am I there? I don't feel as good as I thought I would feel. And I've got clients like that. And then so we track back and it's like, well, you thought it was about money, or you thought it was about proving a point to your dad, or the guy who, dissed you at university, or the boss who fired you when you were 23 or whatever. But what was it really about? Like what in you made you believe that you had something important enough to say or provide that you took all the risk and went through all the pain and dealt with all the ups and downs of starting your own business? Very, very rarely do I reach a point in that discussion with a founder or an entrepreneur to discover it was really just about money.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't think I ever have. So I think it is a journey. And it can come from failure or success, because you get the same. The thing with failure that is different to success is you don't get the external validation. You're still asking all the same questions, but so is everyone else.
Yeah.
What was he thinking? What a terrible result. But at either end of that spectrum, there is quite an existential question. It's like, what am I here for? Who do I want to be?
Yeah.
What do I want to offer?
And that's something that I've went through exactly. Like, because I grew up in like Preston's, which is like the Liverpool area. I didn't have a lot of money. And then like I've done that and achieved that and I've set myself up financially. And it wasn't so much, it's like, oh, is that it? Like I'm extremely happy, but it's like, okay, now I've ticked that box. It's like,
now what?
Now I can't aim for the same things again. But if you're listening, and then there are a lot of people listening that are in that startup phase, yes, while we're saying at some time there will come a point where you need to reflect and go deeper, that is true, but also at the start, that can be the best fuel you ever need. So
100%.
harness that, utilize it until you've achieved that and tick that box. I think it's one of the most motivating tools anyone can use, male or female. I know particularly for guys, they want to get money and be able to get into the position that they can attract that right partner.
Yes.
And instinctually, that is like two of the most, important things, like protection and love and companionship.
Yeah.
Those are the most biggest core things to the human experience. So
Yes.
Go ahead, tick that box. This is what comes later, which is really interesting. I think if I think back to when I was outside of like just starting uni and in that world, a word I heard a lot more back then, obviously you still hear it now, is ambition. But another A word that I hear a lot more these days is alignment rather than just ambition. When do you think alignment should be prioritized over pure ambition? And to be a little bit more specific for that, in terms of alignment, working on a business that you feel really, really passionate about and going to make you feel really good and light you up, versus that is just objectively a better opportunity and a better way for me to change my life financially.
Yeah.
I can go and do that for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years and then switch over to alignment. What do you think is the right time to prioritize each one of those things? Alignment from the start or chase the financial opportunities? What do you think about that?
And you mean alignment with higher purpose or alignment with values?
Values, higher purpose, back to that, like what you would do for free.
Yeah.
Like trying to tick as many, like the Ikigai crossover thing as well. Like, what's your thoughts on that?
I think in an ideal world, you kick off with a business opportunity that is aligned with your values and you find a way to align purpose and profit. That's a perfect world.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't do that.
I didn't do that.
and I don't know too many people who have. But at a certain point in time, the recognition sets in that money alone is not enough. And what you spoke to there was economic security and the ability to secure a mate. Two very big drivers for a man. I'm sure it's the same for women, but I can only speak for men. There's a few things that happen as you go on that journey. One, the satisfaction that comes from, there are certain people that love nothing more than making money. Okay. So I'm not talking to those guys. In fact, they would have switched off by now. They would not be listening. So I'm not talking to those guys. I think you can have both. I think you can have a very clear sense of purpose and develop a very profitable business. And I would go so far as to say the people that I've worked with that have a very clear sense of purpose have more profitable businesses over time.
Yeah.
They have ups and downs because they're not chasing every single fad or every single, little blip on social media. But over time, and as you start to measure your life in decades as opposed to quarters or years, then you start to see that the consistency of their results are better than their competitor set. And there's a very simple reason for that. As you tire, as you fatigue, as you encounter the inevitable hurdles and challenges of life and business, if you can tap into something deeper, then you can work harder. And if you are tapping into higher purpose, you can eliminate a whole bunch of noise and you can work smarter. And I don't think it's a choice. The whole harder, smarter thing is not a choice. Like, you need to do both. As an entrepreneur, you've got no choice. So I think it helps with both. It helps energize you, and it helps you overcome fatigue and exhaustion. But it also helps you make better, smarter decisions, because you've got a true north. You've got a touchstone. And the more successful you become, the more opportunities will be put in front of you. And you have to start to develop a filter. Again, the only filter you could have if you wanted to is ROI. But when you have the luxury of making choices, like you're beyond the point where you are solving for basic economic security. And I do not dismiss that. That is absolutely job one.
Yeah.
So until you have a roof over your head and food on the table and the kids have got school uniforms every day, like, I'm not talking about that level of deprivation. Obviously, at a certain point, you don't have the luxury. You just have to put food on the table. But once you have achieved a level of economic security that you start to create choices, then that's certainly a moment. If you haven't done it previously, it's a great time to realign or align for the first time, if you haven't already, with I hate to use the word legacy, but it's sort of like, how do I want to be remembered?
Yeah.
And I now have the luxury of choice. I have the luxury of options. What's my filter going to be? Is it going to be purely financial?
Yeah.
Is it going to be purely altruistic? Can I have both? And my thinking is you can have both.
I think as well, it wasn't what I did. I think I would tend to agree with what you said. And if I was to start again, I would start from that perspective. I think for one of the reasons most businesses aren't super successful in the first 3 months, a lot of them not even for the first year, knowing that a lot of people, if they aren't in love with the business or the product or the service that they're offering, I think it'll be a lot harder to, continue to work through those moments. So many businesses fail in the first year, the statistics. So many people get turned off. They try to start one business. Oh, it's not for me, and they give up.
Yes.
So I think if you're really passionate about it, it'll help you see those moments through as well. But the conflicting side of me, it's like, while that's great, and some people, I feel like, if you're honest with yourself, for the people listening, you'll know, are you one of those people that are really purpose and driven, or some people that don't really go too deep on that woo-woo stuff? They just want to provide for their families. You can also fall in love with the sport of business, what I call it. And then it doesn't matter what you're selling. You just love building a business and growing a business. And that is incredibly fulfilling as well. But there probably will become a day once you've ticked that box that it no longer is. And then we're back to square one on that, looking for that like true North Star. So I think that's amazing. Now I want to feed on from this because it really makes sense coming off what we spoke about, is the woman in the red dress, or the shiny object syndrome that happens to so many entrepreneurs, happened to me. Again, took on too many things, and I've been, for the last 2 years, trying to rectify some decisions I made, taking on too many things.
Yes.
And I'm finally getting it into, and I probably still will be for the rest of this year. By the start of next year, I think everything will be in control, and where I only have probably 3 core things and they all feed into each other. And I know you're saying 3 is still crazy. I think ideally for most people listening, one business is going to be best for you. I'm a little bit too ADHD for that. I need multiple things, but the only way the logical part of my brain that now is more experienced can agree that that's a good thing, is if they're all interconnected and feed each other.
Yes.
But talk to me about where you think so many entrepreneurs go wrong with the shiny object syndrome, because it's rife around the community.
Oh, it's everywhere.
And have you ever had that experience?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, in the business that I founded, we got too distracted. We tried to do too much. We bit off way more than we could chew. And that business did okay, but it could have gone a lot better if I'd focused more. So I can absolutely relate to this question because I've experienced myself, and I've got multiple clients who are working through this same challenge. I think the thing is about the entrepreneurial mindset is that by your very nature, you're highly driven, you're highly creative, and you tend to get excited by new stuff. And it's,
don't we all?
And as you, even early on, before you've even got the resources to actualize any of these opportunities, you can often find yourself debating between different options and doing test and learn cycles on 3 or 4 different ideas. And, it's hard to settle on one. as you become more successful, I think it's a combination of a couple of things. I think externally you will get more opportunities. So as the people around you start to recognize you as a successful operator, that you're a visionary who can also execute, which is a rare beast, then people will want to get you involved in what they're doing. So you'll get pitches for ideas. People will just share ideas with you. They'll ask you to invest. They'll ask you to lead, buy my company. Like those things just start to pop up. So that's external, and you need a filter.
Exactly what happened with me.
Right.
Yeah.
And that filter is really important. And I would love to imagine that it's a combination of profit motive and purpose driven. For some people, it's going to be pure profit. For a rare few, it will be pure purpose. I think you can have both. But there's also an internal risk, and that is that the more successful you become, the temptation becomes that, and it's hubris basically, you start to believe you've got the Midas touch and that you have somehow discovered, you've hacked the code, you've somehow figured it out. And no matter what you turn your mind to, you will make a success.
Yeah.
And there's a few examples over the course of history of people who can do that. But the vast majority of us need to recognize our strengths for what they are and be self-aware enough to understand what our weaknesses are. Now, that doesn't mean you can't pursue different businesses outside of your original domain, but it does mean you should be cautious about assuming whatever domain expertise you developed in your first business will perfectly translate to your second, third, fourth, and fifth. So bringing people around you, and this is not a pitch for coaches like me, by the way, but bringing people around you, whether they're investors, they're board members, they're key employees who can solve for the gaps in your knowledge. So you're bringing leadership expertise and you're bringing maybe growth expertise, or you know how to build a fantastic team or whatever it is, but in a completely new domain. So it's a totally new product, different customer set, it's a new service, it's a new geography, whatever it is. The risk of hubris is you're like, oh, I'll figure it out. Like I figured it out the first time. So, how hard can it be? I'm a smart guy. I've got a track record of success. That can be quite dangerous. So I think it's both external risk in terms of just the amount of noise that's directed your way when you start to enjoy a little success. And it's the risk of hubris and confusing domain expertise in any one domain as being somehow perfectly translatable to a completely new domain.
For me as well, and I think to not even look at it on as much of a deep level, I think even if you have figured out, let's say, some element of the secret sauce, even though it changes year on year, particularly if you're in e-commerce,
yes,
I think your ability to execute and the power of momentum when you're all in on one thing, when you split yourself up into 3 or 4 different things, it's not even splitting it. Let's just say you have 3 different things. I don't even think each one, it's reducing you by 66%, because the power of momentum when you're all in on one thing, it doubles or triples the total of all the sum of the parts. So that's, I think, where the risk is. So I think if you're in that situation and let's just say someone's had a business for 5-6 years, they come to you for consulting and they're saying, look, Josh, like I've got a really good business, but I'm just not feeling it at all anymore. What do you think's the move then? Do they close out that cycle, sell the business before starting the next one? What would be the logical decision that you would advocate for someone to make in that situation?
Yeah, first of all, I completely agree with you that there's something magical and mystical about going all in on one thing. So if we want to be completely, agnostic about it, we would just say it's the power of focus and discipline. If you want to be a little bit more woo about it, I would go back to what I was talking about before in terms of flow state,
the power of obsession.
Yes, and when you are tapping into your highest potential, intellectual, emotional, creative, the whole thing, and you're focusing that like a laser on one opportunity, that is incredibly powerful. The low wattage laser that cuts through steel versus the 10,000 watt floodlight that you can't even feel from the footy field, right? So you tend to move from laser to floodlight. You're trying to illuminate multiple objects at once, and it's just not as powerful. So I completely agree with that. To answer your question though, if someone, this has occurred multiple times in the last 15 years that I've been doing this consulting, if someone comes to me and says, I'm kind of done with this, I'm pretty bored now and I want to start a new business, my first response is, let's sell it. So in that case, why wouldn't we exit? And there's a bunch of different ways to exit. A management buyout is an option if there's no natural purchaser. If they've got a good management team in place, you've got a trade sale, you've got, financial investors, all the rest of it. And we would then look at, if there's not good succession planning in place, we would then map out a plan, because you can't sell without succession. So unless it's a trade buyer who truly believes that they can just plug it into their existing enterprise, you've got to have some level of succession redundancy around you.
Yeah.
So that's one option. if they are absolutely determined to hold on to the business, it's a great cash cow. Like I don't want to let it go. If I sold it, I don't know where I'd put the money because this thing is so profitable. I want to hang on to it. Then I would say you need to put professional management in place, give them skin in the game so they act like an owner.
Yeah.
And you almost replace your owner obsession with professional management. I don't think it's enough just to put in a CEO or an MD or a GM. I think they need to have some skin in the game because then they're getting more obsessed like you were obsessed. You can't replace a super obsessed founder guy with a $300,000 a year MD and get the same result.
Yeah. You spoke about that, the power of momentum and or maybe just simply put the power of focused. But building brands at times, and that's why I think it's so addictive for people, like building brands can sometimes feel like manifestation in motion. Like you're tapping into source, you're creating all these things. What are your beliefs on that? Do you believe in visualization and law of attraction? Where have you, through all of your experiences into spirituality and quantum physics and all the research you've done, where do you align with that? What do you believe in?
I believe that there is something well beyond what we can perceive that is available to us. And because we cannot perceive it with our five senses, it does not mean it's not there.
Yeah.
And there are lots of different words for what that is. And you can kind of, choose your own adventure in terms of what you want to subscribe to. But in my own life and in that of my most successful clients, they and I have experienced something that is not necessarily explainable. And I know we're going to lose 90% of your audience at this point.
I don't think so. I've talked about this a lot. And if you think it's not real, I mean, just look at the hundreds and thousands of countless people that have built $1 million and $1 billion businesses that talk about the power of it. They're not saying all this stuff. They're not making it up. I can swear by, I've experienced the benefits of the law of attraction in my life. I look back at my previous experience before starting the business and realizing I got so many things that I wanted because I used to daydream about my goals.
Yes.
Then I read The Secret like so many people. I'm like, oh, what the fuck? Like that's why I've been so successful. I've been subconsciously visualizing. So the year and a half or probably the year leading up to launching Happy Skin Co., I thought I'm going to practice visualization consciously instead of just this hobby that I did because I love thinking about my goals. I did that religiously, hours and hours and hours of visualization every week, but it wasn't something I forced. I enjoyed doing. I feel like I'm time traveling. I'm living that life as that person I knew I was always meant to be. And we launched Happy Skin Co in April of 2018. My whole goal was by the end of the year to make enough money to quit my job and go full time. We had to quit our jobs after like 2 or 3 weeks. We made $1 million in the first 3.5 months, made 10 mil the first year, even more the second year. And people think, yes, look, that does look like an overnight success. We've spotted an opportunity. We had great product to market fit. We scaled really aggressively with the marketing. But where all that really started for me was that 12 to 18 months before, where I got so clear in my vision and I lived and experienced and I saw those things so many times. So reality didn't take very long to catch up.
Yes. So Dylan, I think what you just said then was really important. It started with that. So I think, there's that. The quantum field doesn't respond to what we want. It responds to what we do. Now that's a Joe Dispenza quote. And if you look at, Christianity talks about God helps those who help themselves. There's a million different examples. So it begins with a thought. It is then, momentum is added to that thought through focus. And you can call it prayer, you can call it manifestation, call it, lots of different words. But then you take action. Now, the only argument I would have with some of those who say all you need to do is practice manifestation and the universe will give it to you. I don't think that's the way it works.
Great.
I think you absolutely need to clearly articulate in your own mind what you want and you need to be obsessively focused on it. And you should, in my opinion, engage in some sort of daily ritual that continuously every day reminds you, grounds you back to that genesis. This is what I want. This is where it's starting from. That said, if you just then go about your day and go back to flipping burgers, it's very unlikely to happen all on its own.
What's that Einstein quote? I'm sure you'll know it. Something to the effect of like, the universe doesn't understand the difference between like a thought and reality. That isn't psychology or whatever, it's physics. Do you know I'm butchering it?
Yeah, no,
but it's like,
I know it.
Read that Einstein, Google that. Like, I know I completely butchered it, but read that and hear that coming from Einstein, one of the like most, well-known scientists in the world. And it really like makes you, it's just another data point, another person that's highly respected talking about all these things, like you said, that we can't necessarily touch or feel or see with our five senses, but is undoubtedly there and real and more powerful than a lot of people care to admit. And if you don't want to get into that stuff, be my guest, don't do it. You're only limiting yourself.
100% agree. I mean, the thing is that there are very well-established branches of conventionally acceptable science that are saying exactly the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So the whole notion that this is sort of relegated to the Byron Bay crystal crowd and a couple of Zen monks up in, it's just not true.
Yeah.
So if you're in the least bit curious and you're even vaguely widely read, you will have encountered this. The language will be slightly different. But if you see through that and if you distill it down to its essence, what we know for sure is that what we can perceive with our five senses in terms of the energetic field is very limited. And every single time there is a new generation of scientific instrument, we discover a new level of what we're not aware of. Now, so the notion that dogs can hear things that we can't hear, and that's completely acceptable, but there's no chance of an energetic field that we're not aware of. I mean, it's just crazy. We've got senses. We've got five senses that are highly attuned to survival. Mm-hmm. They evolved over a couple of million years to make us who we are. The whole notion of what lies beyond that, where we came from, what was before the Big Bang, what happens before, who were you before you were born, who are you after you die? These are kind of, unfortunately, this day and age, they're relegated as kind of, they're all a bit new age, a bit mystical,
pseudoscience at best.
Yeah, it's a bit metaphysical. But I don't see it that way. And I know I open with this and I'm repeating myself, but I don't see a distinction between the spiritual and the material. Mm-hmm. I think it is all around us all the time. You just got to tap into it.
And I think even for the people that are staunchly against this stuff, every single person has had the experience where you were just literally thinking about someone and then you look at your phone and they're calling you.
Yeah.
Everyone has experienced that countless times. What is that?
Yeah.
What is this? There's something happening there that we don't understand. And I think there are some entrepreneurs that are aware of that and tap into that and harness that as their superpower. And maybe they're not the best and brightest, but they've got a clear vision and they really understand the power and the laws of energy. And I think that's how some of the people that weren't necessarily the most brilliant minds have built some of the best businesses, because they're tapping into different things that the just logical thought process driven ones aren't going to really believe in or tap into at all.
No, I agree. And I think if you can combine that kind of linear with the lateral, if you can combine both sides of the brain and beyond the brain, because that's what we're talking about, then you are kind of unstoppable.
Yes.
And I think it'd be like understanding that going to the gym made you stronger and more resilient and deciding not to go to the gym. Like this is available to all of us. It's not difficult. It requires just drop the skepticism for a minute.
Yeah.
Develop a daily habit, choose your preferred methodology and see what happens.
Exactly. And commit to it and just don't. If it doesn't feel good on the first day or it feels a bit forced, sometimes things don't come naturally, but if you do it every day for a month, I guarantee the 30th time you do it will feel more natural and easier and you'll enjoy it more than the first.
Yes.
It's just natural human progression, and people want to be great without giving them permission to be crap, because you need to be crap to get okay.
Yeah.
You need to be okay to get good. You need to be good to get great. No one just wakes up and they're the best in the world at something.
Yeah.
You have to earn that. It's
100%.
pay to play. Just like all these things, you have to invest the time and energy in it if you want to see the return on things. Now, I want to take it back to what we were just discussing in terms of like for the successful entrepreneurs, or, you know, if your business is growing, you have so many different departments and you're expanding internationally and you've got new MPD, or you're someone that has multiple different businesses and then a podcast and things like that. When you take on a new client to mentor, when they say, all right, Josh, here is everything I'm doing, how can people audit their own lives to realize what stays, what goes, what needs to be prioritized, and what's a nice to have but not necessary?
Yeah, I mean, it's really challenging. And I think that the further you progress, the more successful you become, the more moving parts there are in life. Mm-hmm. And I think you have to do a pretty ruthless audit. I mean, a lot of people do it around New Year for obvious reasons. I think you
good
could
on New Year's resolution. Yeah.
I think at the very least on an annual basis, you need to do an audit. And I think you need to. So what can be really helpful, a very practical exercise, is to look at the last 90 days of your calendar and to go through, and this sounds like a big exercise, but it's not, because it's all electronic and you'll flick through it quickly. Literally try to recall who that meeting was with and what you discussed and da-da-da-da-da. And if that's too much, do 30 days. But the point is you go through and audit a period of time and you look at how you're allocating your time. It is your most valuable resource. And it is how we tell ourselves in terms of our subconscious and how we tell others what we value most. And it's a really useful exercise to go through a block of time, examine how you spent that time, and put kind of a 1 to 5 against it. Did this energize me? Did I walk out neutral? Did I emerge with less energy than I went into it? And you can call it happiness, you can call it energy, you can sense of fulfillment, whatever your preferred description is, whatever your ultimate outcome, desired outcome is, measure it against that. Because you can't argue with the time that you've allocated over the last 30, 60, 90 days. It's a fact. Something led you to allocate your time that way. In hindsight, would you allocate it the same way? And you start to see patterns of people or processes or systems or partners that are net negative in terms of how they impact your energy and your sense of fulfillment or your sense of optimism or whatever it is. That process can be really revealing. And you end up finding certain friends in inverted commas that maybe aren't really friends. And you can find partners or people within the business that you're running that suck a lot of time and don't give a lot back in return. And on the flip side, you can find certain people or places or partners that you allocate hardly any time to who just are so renewing for you. You walk out with a sense of renewed purpose and renewed energy and renewed focus. So you turn down the volume on those that deserve the volume to be turned down, and you turn it up on those that deserve it to be turned up. Now that's just one example. There's a bunch.
Yeah.
But just a simple time audit and an assessment on a relative scale that is a personal scale to you on how much you got out of that. Because you invested time. Yeah. Your most precious resource. What did you get back?
Exactly. And I want to ask you a question. I don't know if there's because I know you work with so many different people. So I don't know if there's a percentage of time or if it's so like different depending on the size of the business and the stage they're at. But if I'm just, as you were speaking, I'm trying to do the audits of, what makes me feel good in terms of my own practices. What I realize when I get caught into the trap of falling into a certain percentage of my a certain percentage of my calendar that I'm, operating and implementing, I feel like, there's a learning curve and a time I have to do that. But if I feel like I've been doing the same thing and I'm just implementing and operating, doing that one thing, I feel like, fuck, I'm stuck on that hamster wheel again. I'm busy being busy. I could have, trained someone else or replaced this. Is there a right percentage for founders of businesses to be focused on the operating of the business or the maintenance stage versus how much of my time am I focused on growth and moving forward through the stages? Is there a right balance between that? Is it fluid? What's your thoughts?
I think it's different for different founders. I prefer founders to be focused primarily on growth. Now, that requires a level of maintenance, and you need to have the right people in place to then take over maintenance. But by nature, as the entrepreneur, you have a growth mindset. You are driven to grow. And if you spend too much time in maintenance, it can actually get a bit dangerous and destructive for everyone involved. The Buddhists talk about that growth, maintenance, destruction cycle. Mm-hmm. So, when we first start a business, it's all about growth. You then hit a certain point and it's primarily about maintenance and bedding down. To get back into growth, something has to be destroyed. So that's difficult for people to wrap their head around, but it's a law of nature. I mean, if you look at the way forests or oceans or that's the way it works.
After a bushfire, they grow back greener than they ever have before,
100%. So it's the same thing in personal relationships, and it's the same thing with your business. Now, what's being destroyed could just be an assumption. It could be a job title. It could be a work practice. But for you to get out of maintenance and back into growth, you may have to destroy some assumptions around where you add the most value, or whether you really need to be a micromanager, or whether you could possibly delegate a bit more, or the autonomy that the team is asking for, maybe they should get it.
Yeah.
And that frees you up to get back into growth. But the hardest thing for entrepreneurs, particularly when it is their baby, is to allow a level of autonomy at the executive level that frees them up to go back to focus on growth, because it's your baby and no one cares for it like you. No one loves it like you. And there's a sense that I've got to be across everything because no one cares the way I care. So it's hard, but you've got to do it.
And it's one of the first realizations, very, very early stage lesson that you need to learn, when you're starting your first successful business and it's growing. Yes, people might not be able to execute it at the same level as you, but if you want to be doing all the things yourself, you're never really going to grow far. So I think, giving up control and a little bit of the perfectionism that comes with being so passionate about what you're creating, you need to give that up.
Yes.
I've actually realized in certain ways I've become have better attention to detail, but in a lot of ways I've have to become less of a perfectionist the more I've got on my plate and the bigger that things have gotten for myself. So when it comes to like, I think the biggest decisions any startup business has to make, whether they're still working a full-time job and it's on the outside, it's even more important. Those time investment decisions are the biggest decisions people make, even probably more so than capital at the start, right?
Yes.
If you're working your job, you can always save the money, but the time investments are really, really important, particularly in that first, well, at all stages, not just at this first stage.
Yeah.
But do you have any mental models for making difficult decisions that you take your clients through?
That's a good question. So what sort of difficult decision?
I guess we're like prioritization, first step of what to do now, and then when to pivot and when to double down on certain things in the business, I think are the two that will be most relevant for the people listening to this podcast.
Okay. So I think in terms of the first part of the question, prioritization, I work my clients through a process of, it's a 3-level process. So it's about strategic clarity, being crystal clear on what we're trying to achieve.
It needs to start with that, right?
Yeah.
Because if you try and do that with that, then again, just think of my own experience, it won't work.
Yeah, you just run around in circles. And you're just chasing your tactical tail from one end of the field
right.
to
Let's
the
try
other.
this. No, let's try that. Yeah,
exactly.
definitely.
We have to know where we're going. And that can be broken down to a great level of detail, or it can be fairly broad brushstrokes, but you've got to have that North Star. What is this business designed to achieve, and how will we mark that achievement, say 3 years out from now? Breaking it down to 12 months, what milestones do we need to have hit in 12 months to have a high level of conviction we're on track for that 3-year objective? And then you break it down into 90-day goals. You then achieve alignment. So that next alignment is often where these things go pear-shaped, because simply communicating a strategy is not alignment. Like telling people where you want to go is not alignment. Aligning with the individuals at the executive level, so your direct reports, your closest teammates, needs a level of EQ and empathy, not just IQ and good communication, because everyone's motivated by slightly different things. Everyone has a slightly different agenda. You need to ensure that what you say is understood the way you mean when you say it at that executive level. Alignment's incredibly important.
Yep.
If you've achieved true alignment and it's backed up with objective measures of success, so milestones, KPIs, owners, deliverables, all the usual stuff, then you can step back and allow a level of tactical autonomy for them to execute, such that when difficult decisions arise, we are approaching them within a frame that is documented. So within that documented frame, regarding our strategic objective, how does this difficult decision impact our ability to execute faster, better, cheaper towards our strategic objective? So given a choice, you have a marker that indicates whether or not your decision is taking you closer to that marker or not. Absent that, it becomes almost who's the most persuasive in the meeting. You know, who's the most articulate, who's got the biggest voice, who told the best joke. So I think documenting where you want to go and creating guardrails for the team in terms of measuring their outcomes, KPIs. That's incredibly important.
And that's not your instinct to do when you just start your first business and you haven't been a manager through corporate.
It's not. Honestly, I've got clients who've been going 5-6 years that do not have a real sense of their strategy. If they're winning market share and they're still profitable, they're happy. Now there's nothing wrong with that.
I think that's probably 90% of people in e-com.
I think it's a lot. And I think that can yield a really nice lifestyle business. You know, that keeps the wolves from the door and pays the bills and gives you a certain level of social status. And, you know, I think a lot of people are satisfied with that. If we look at the businesses that emerge as 1, 2, or 3 in their category, where the vast majority of enterprise value lies in any category, they don't do that. They have a very clear understanding of where as a team they are going, who is responsible for what to get there, and specifically 90-day by 90-day, what their KPIs are to give everyone a sense of confidence they're good teammates. You know, so Michael Hooper and I spent a bit of time together as he was sort of thinking about what to do post ARU, and he was talking about the way they think about team and in the Wallabies, and it was really familiar to me. It was more or less the same language we use in business. But, you know, you're on the field because you're a great player. But if you don't play as a team and you are not following the strategy for the game, it doesn't matter how good you are. Those brief moments of heroics are not good enough. You've got to do your job. You've got to put the ball in front of the other guy. So I think that's the answer to the first question. You've got to have objective markers to make the right decision and indeed to measure your success post that decision.
Yeah.
But in terms of the prioritization, in terms of the double down or walk away, that's really hard.
Yeah.
That's really hard. And I think that is a combination of objective markers and the founder's subjective belief, because sometimes, and this is where it gets hard for everyone, but I've seen examples of where, Thom Browne. So when I joined Thom, everyone was telling him to go bankrupt, from family members to his personal lawyer to everyone he owed money to. There is no one, I think apart from me, who looked at that business and his team actually, and Winter and a few others who believed in him. Most people though around him said that there was no way out of this hole. I spent time with him consulting before I accepted the role of CEO, and I became convinced that his determination, complete conviction, beyond determination, total conviction that this would work, I was so ready to go on that journey with him. Now, there was something about him. There was no objective data. There's no number I could point you to. There's no report. There's no graph. There was something about his determination, his strength of character, and his total obsession that I went, I think we can do this. And, so I would say, to answer your question, the objective data is really important. And you may encounter times where everyone around you is convinced that failure is not just imminent, but inevitable.
Yep.
And you may still believe. Now, if you still believe, it's not stubbornness, it's not hubris, it's not ego. You truly believe that you're still on the cusp of something great, then don't stop.
This is so relevant because so many people listening would be in their first year of business, and it's like, okay, is this worth it? Do I keep going? Do I fold? I think this is great.
And because, Dylan, the worst thing that can happen is that you'll be wrong and you'll lose some money. That's the worst thing that can happen. Yeah. And don't die wondering.
Let me ask you a question about leadership, because when I think back to what I struggled with probably in my first 2-3 years of entrepreneurship, again, not having any proper corporate experience managing teams or any training, you start a business and you start growing so quickly, you need to hire people and you're like, all right, you just got to figure it out as you go. But I know there's a lot of people that would be listening to this podcast that maybe have 3, 4, 5, up to 10 staff, just sort of figuring things out when they go. What I really struggled with the balance of, and I definitely know I didn't get it right, so I'd love your perspective on this. When someone's just starting to build their team, they don't have all these layers of management or a HR department. You are who everyone goes to report straight into the founder of the business. How do you manage bringing on a team and making sure you're giving them everything they need, you're answering all your questions, you're spending enough time with them to understand their motivations and make sure they're on the right track? How do you manage that, which in of itself can almost be a full-time job, versus the roles and responsibilities as the CEO or the director of the business, because they can be a full-time job in each. And if you're trying to make yourself work 16-hour days, day in, day out, you can get to burnout really quickly. How do you balance those in those early stages?
I think, look, that is a fantastic question, because I think it is incredibly difficult. And the trite answer would be, you've just got to work harder. You just got to put more hours in. And there is an element of that, but I think it's a bit more nuanced. I think you can minimize the drain on your time and energy by very clearly documenting and aligning. So I know I'm repeating my last answer, but there is some real magic in clearly documenting for everyone, all stakeholders, internal and external. So I mean partners, financiers, investors, your board, everyone else. This is what we are going to do together as a team over the next 3 years, and breaking it down into bite-sized chunks, typically 90-day sprints, and then allocating owners to the various deliverables across that. If you've got the right people, when you talk to really ambitious, smart people, their number one complaint, at least in the startup world, is that they don't have a clear understanding of how their effort is contributing to the overall success of the organization. And they got caught up in the energy and they fell in love with the founder and they quit their good corporate job, and now they're in the midst of this complete chaos and they're not quite sure what the fuck's going on.
Startup world is very different. Yeah.
So the right guy or girl with clarity over what you're trying to achieve as an organization, broken down to the function that they're working within, broken down further to their specific deliverables, that can be quite transformative because then they're coming to you. If there is no one to report to, they're just reporting to you because eventually they have managers, but they're reporting to you now. They will come to you when they have a problem that they cannot solve within the defined frame of what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Because what I found when I've been a part of startups or I founded my own is when we're not clear on what it is we're trying to achieve, we haven't defined success. There's not a frame within which we're operating that is clearly defined. Then you spend a lot of time talking to people about stuff that's completely irrelevant. That I tried this. I'm like, why do you try that? Like, it's got nothing to do with what we're doing. Or this guy wants to meet us about blah, blah, blah. I'm like, but that's not what we're here to do. There's an opportunity to partner with XYZ for marketing. I'm like, why would we want to do that? Like, that's got nothing to do with our mission. So I think the starting point has to be, and you can do this in one day.
Yeah.
You can have an offsite. You can facilitate it with someone who knows what they're doing, and you can emerge at the end of the day with strategic map and complete alignment. So this is not some massive drain of time and money.
Yeah.
And it will save you hundreds of hours over the course of the year.
Exactly. That's what popped in my head when, like you said, look, the easy answer is work harder and work more. But if you take the time to put that structure in place and lean on people that has experience about how to set these processes and KPIs and structures, you do that. Even if you try and do it yourself and it takes all of your extra time for a month, you implement that. Then what's going to take you 4 hours a day of managing, you can get done in one because everyone knows what they're doing. There's a clear plan and structure to follow. That's brilliant. Now, you've been a part of businesses that have gone through hyper growth stages. Businesses valued in the 9 figures. When they hit that inflection point, they've got product to market fit. Their customers are obsessed, and they've got that momentum building. What does that feel like? Can you describe that feeling? And then, like, how, if there is something that you could do to create that, what does that look like?
The feeling is awesome. I mean, it feels magical. To me, it feels like, I think all of us grew up wanting to be rock stars or F1 drivers or, famous singers or actors or whatever. I was certainly a victim of that fantasy myself. I'm not suggesting it feels as good as that, but there is something about orchestrating a group of people towards a shared sense of higher purpose and enrolling a tribe of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people around you that feels enormously exciting and enormously fulfilling. There's risk in all that. We spoke about hubris before. You can start to, believe your own press and drink your own Kool-Aid, and that can get dangerous fast. But if you can resist the temptation of getting too caught up in the idea that you're some kind of, second coming of Jesus Christ, then it can be enormously satisfying. In terms of what can you do, the second part of the question was how can you get there? How can you accelerate the journey? How
can you accelerate that? I more want to ask about like the cultural vibe of that. And let me frame it slightly differently, this question. If you were, obviously you're full-time on the consulting and you're doing what you're doing, but let's just say you paused all that and you're like, I've got this idea for this physical product brand I want to build. You're not going to go get investment money. You're going to use money that you've saved along the years. What are the characteristics that you're looking for in those first 10 hires to help you create that momentum, that rocket ship that will take you there? Okay, got it.
I think the kind of cliche is a high performance culture. What you're trying to develop is a high performance culture. And a lot of people mistake pinball machines and, beanbags for a high performance culture. A high performance culture is much more aligned to what I was touching on before with the Wallabies or any elite sporting team, elite units in the military, that there is a absolute obsession with victory. And there is a desire to when we spoke before about that desire to prove yourself, like I want to make my mark. You need to find a collection of people who are just as driven as you are. They may not have the risk appetite that you have, and therefore they're not starting their own businesses, but many of the other qualities that you have, they share. They're very, very driven. They're very determined. They're very resilient. They're going to be able to go through the ups and downs. The worst thing you can do is bring on people who are attracted to the idea of a startup because they've romanticized it. They've listened to podcasts like this. They love your story. They love your guest stories, and they think it's going to be so much fun and really exciting and really cool. And they'll be able to tell all their friends they're not working at NAB anymore. They're part of a cool little biotech startup or they're part of an amazing company that's reinventing sunglasses or whatever it is. The truth of the matter is that it's brutal, right? Like, you've gone through it. It is that Elon Musk quote about, staring into the abyss and eating glass. Like, that is, there's a lot of that. Yeah. So I think they've obviously got to be smart at what they do. They don't have to be smart at everything, but whatever they are being tasked to do, they've got to be very, very smart and very clever. I think you want people who are very curious. The fact of the matter is that none of us know everything there is to know at 25. I mean, none of us know everything there is to know at 90. So they've got to be curious and hungry for more knowledge, hungry for more personal development, hungry for improvement in everything in the business. And that the idea that we can celebrate victory, but we're not satisfied because we want to go again and we want to go again and we want to go again. That kind of unstoppable force requires some combination of smarts, energy, and an enormous amount of resilience.
You've worked across multiple 9-figure businesses. Let me ask you this: if there's anything you can pinpoint, let's just say you had 10 business owners, 10 businesses, and 10 founders that were all doing $10 million a year. What do you think is in the DNA of either the founder or the business? If you had an hour to speak to each one of them, could you point out some of the DNA of the ones that you think stand the best chance at hitting 100 million?
I'm going to sound really presumptuous in this because I think everyone you talk to who has met a bunch of founders who have succeeded at that level will probably have a different answer. But for me, there is a level of passion and purpose, but also a ruthless approach to profitability. So now, of course, if we're talking about a tech company or something you're going to sell early, it could be revenue, not profit.
Yeah.
But if you're talking a products business and you don't have buckets of cash, then at some point, pretty early on, you've got to be profitable. So I think that's a rare combination. The ability to persuade others, the passion and the energy that enrolls those early A-team players. Because you don't want a bunch of Muppets that couldn't get another job. Mm-hmm. Like you want people that have 5 job offers on the table.
And they choose this.
And you want them to work for you for half the price.
Yeah.
That requires a level of passion and persuasiveness that is, 10 out of 10. So they clearly possess that. Secondly, they do have a sense of purpose. Because at 10 million, you've achieved great success, but there's a long way you could go if you're inclined. You could go to 20, you could go to 50, you go to 100, you go to 1 billion, you go on from there. So I think a sense of purpose will continue to drive you long beyond the economic security that you initially aimed for. In fact, long beyond genuine wealth, because you're driven by something more spiritual, honestly, than material.
Yeah.
That's incredibly important. But I'd also want to know that they'd either failed in the past or they'd experienced extreme stress and near failure on their journey to 10 million. If you show me a founder that's had like a growth curve like that and they've never encountered a significant dip, they've never sweated at night wondering how to make payroll, they've never scrapped around family and friends to raise dough for the next inventory batch, then I will show you someone who's going to have a very rude shock when it happens. So it's if you've got off the mat multiple times and got back into the fight, I'd back you every day. In fact, if you show me a guy's at 5 and he's gone through that, or girl, he's gone through that, and the other guy or girl has got to 10 and never really suffered severe adversity and overcome it, I'd take the 5 guy.
What do you think you can either give a real life example if you can think of one, or just in general, what are the decisions that businesses need to make that takes a 10 million business into a $100 million business? Are there any key, because I can speak to getting to 10, but I have no idea how to get to 10 to 100 because I haven't done it. What do you think some of those key decisions or focuses are to go from 10 to 100? I know there's a lot of stages in between. Yeah.
So I think and I won't repeat myself completely because I don't want to burn the time, but part of it is
the fact that we repeat so many of these things, repeat and link around, it just goes to show 100%.
Repeat for a reason. I think strategy, alignment, and tactical autonomy become even more important because, of course, as you scale, your ability to micromanage and be across everything diminishes. And it starts diminishing when you start doing a few million in turnover. But by the time you're doing 40 or 50 or $60 million, there's people in the business who are doing jobs that you didn't even know existed when you started the business.
Definitely.
So the notion that you can somehow do that job better than them is just pure fantasy. So you've got to get comfortable with strategic clarity, genuine alignment at the executive level, and then letting people do what they do best, giving them autonomy. I think that's incredibly important. Secondly, when you're starting up, everyone wears 5 hats. So your title may be CEO, or it may be Chief Product Officer, or it may be CTO, but in reality, you're doing 5 things minimum. Roles are shallow and very broad when you start. As you grow, they become deep and very narrow. Now, a byproduct of that is some of the people who were great to get you from 0 to 10 or 0 to 5 or 0 to 15 may not be the right. They may be guys you want to keep on the team. Guys, and I say guys meaning guys and girls. I'm not being sexist.
Yep.
They may be guys that you want to keep on the team. You're not going to let them go, but they may not be the right people to hold that role as it scales. Because as the required skill set becomes deeper, there's just no substitute for experience and pattern recognition that comes from being and doing that job in multiple environments. So there's a people part of that. I also think that the little problems, and even at 10 million, still relatively small. And I know that sounds huge to people who are just starting.
10 million, do you think it's still generalists rather than specialists?
I think it's
the tipping point.
You're on the transition.
Yeah.
I think it starts to become, it depends on the business, obviously, and it depends on the product or service, but somewhere in the single digit millions, you start to require more specialists and fewer generalists. And that becomes much more extreme and much more pronounced as you move from 10 to 100. So there's a big people piece in all that, and sorting out, every business needs some generalists. I mean, the CEO is an ultimate generalist, but then there are going to be generalists in other positions. But as the business scales, you will require more specialist skill sets over time. So I think there's a people piece. The other thing is, I was just about to touch on problems. Like, little problems get really, really big if they're not dealt with as you transition from 10 to 100. You can paper over a lot of cracks in the early days. Sheer momentum, the energy, the passion, the heroics from the founding team, you can paper over a lot of cracks. At a certain point in time, if you have not systemized and operationalized to the point where those cracks are not existential, like every business has little problems, but if you're not in the room and one of your heroic co-founders or founding executive team are not in the room, the business should hum along just fine. And at 10 million, that's not always true. But at 100 million, it has to be. You have a fiduciary duty to shareholders and everyone involved that if you get hit by a bus, heaven forbid, or just decide to go sit in a cave in Tibet and meditate for a year, the business is fine. It's going to keep running. So I think there's multiple step changes, but I think that the level of strategy and planning, the level of sort of management systems, you can't manage what you don't measure type stuff gets more and more important as you grow. The people that you need and in various roles, and then how you deal with problems. You can't just paper over them anymore.
I think to go from, like, if you're a first, you've founded a couple of businesses and you're lucky enough to experience this hyper growth, just like the conversation we had with Don until yesterday, who have started Stacks, one of the most recognizable, iconic, Aussie e-com businesses that have launched over the last 10 years. You're going to get to a certain stage, and even just hearing you explain all that stuff, it's like, I think one of the things that you said is get the people around you that have been there and seen it before. Don't expect to figure all this out on yourself, because it's too complicated to get from, like, you can get to 0 to 10 doing 3 or 4 things really well.
Yeah.
But then to get to 100 million, everything has to be systemized and everything and to expect yourself to just be able to think and operate like that when you have no experience. I think that's when you need to make the investment decision to bring some of these people in. If it's not staff, consultants and people to surround you to help you do that journey. And the same thing, if you want to get to 0 to 1, surround yourself from people that have gone to 1 multiple times, or from 1 to 10. That's the way to unlock a lot of that growth. Now I want to change topics a little bit if we can. I want to speak to you about some brand and marketing things. Now, something you talk about, and obviously a lot of people would have heard it before, but I'd love your take on this, is brand is the single best investment a business can make. My question is, again, not everyone's lucky enough to have VC backing and loads of money in the bank. For a startup, the self-funded startup, how does investing in brand, say in the first year or two, what does that look like in practice? How can a startup business invest in brand without a massive budget?
Okay. Great question. I think today the answer is very different to 10 years ago. And the good news is that it's a lot more achievable today than it's ever been. I think, first of all, you have to clearly understand what your brand is. And there's, again, if you don't want to spend money on people like me or on different branding agencies, there's a bunch of books out there that you can refer to that help you workshop what is my brand promise, what's my brand personality, what's the brand positioning, how do we break down vision and values, all that kind of stuff. That sounds a bit academic probably to a lot of people, but it's incredibly helpful because it becomes a touchstone that you can utilize for yourself, for any of your marketing partners, the influencers you might work with, the collaborations you do with the brands
that come in.
Obviously team members, 100%. So we all need to be clear on one vision, which is your vision, the founder's vision of what this brand stands for. What are we promising our community? When you're clear on that and you're clear on the personalities, tone of voice, all that kind of stuff, you can start to create content pillars. So what are we trying to say? So we have these 3 or 4, maybe 5 content pillars that all speak to the promise. So we articulate the promise through different forms or different styles of content.
And is the promise just the function of the product? Is the overall mission of the business what you want to add to the world?
It's more than the product.
Yeah.
Because ultimately we want a brand promise that is effectively you're promising a better life. So like every brand is a version of a better life. So Rolex is going to make me feel more powerful and important, you know. God, like we can run through all the examples. Apple's going to make me feel more creative. Harley Davidson's going to make me feel like a badass, you know, all blah, 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 blah. Nike's going to make me a better athlete. It's not, but that's the promise. So the idea is that by promising a better life, your particular lens on a better life, you will ultimately be able to support multiple products and multiple categories. If the brand is the product, then you don't really have a brand. You have a product and you have a price point. That is nothing wrong with that, but it's very different in terms of enterprise value, the multiple you achieve at exit, than if you have a brand. If your brand supports multiple products across multiple geographies, you have a very, very valuable asset because someone is going to value that on the basis that it's not yet fully exploited. Whereas if your brand is not really a brand, a product, where do I go with that? You're going to get 3, 4, 5 times multiple on profit. If you want 3, 4, 5 times revenue, then you have to have a brand that supports more than what you're doing today. So, but to turn to your question about how do I build it with no money? Well, hopefully eventually you will have money, but to get it to the point where you are generating sufficient revenue to invest real cash, there's never been a moment in time when individual founders were more able to broadcast what they're all about and how they're bringing their promise to life through this product or service than today. So, I mean, I work with a couple of founders who have done a fabulous job with personal branding. I mean, Raquel Boris, who is Elijah, I think is just an absolute firecracker. Yeah. She's incredible. And we could go on with examples. But
I've seen in the last year, at least half a dozen, if not more, people just off the back of organic content hit 100K per month.
100%. Because, you know, ultimately, and we can get into kind of the big societal shifts that are underway at the moment, but we probably shouldn't because I'll burn too much of your time. But there's no question that our trust in the institutions of the past is waning.
Definitely.
Whether that's politicians, traditional religions, corporations, like name your target. There's a level of cynicism now that is very high. The beautiful thing about founder content, particularly long form content like this that can then be spliced up later on, is that in an hour and a half conversation, the script is long forgotten. Like you're getting to know the real me because even if I came in here with talking points, I can't remember what they are. You know, we're 90 minutes into a chat. So founders can start to engage in content creation, long form and short form, that gives a sense of obviously authenticity because it's authentic, but also intimacy in a way that you can't when you've got a go-between, whether that's an advertising agency or an influencer or a model for a photo shoot or whatever. So not only is it more immediate and more real and it feels more powerful as a consequence of that, it's cheap because you don't need to engage the middlemen.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you shouldn't at some point engage in collaborations with others. But as a starting point, founders are in a unique position today to create brand awareness and to start to articulate brand promise through social media and digital media.
How are you? Bit of an aside, but we have been going already. It's 4:50. How are you going for time?
I'm fine.
You speak? Cool.
Yeah.
Just wanted to respect that because I've got some more questions for you. Off the back of that, you were speaking about a reference point where there was a book or someone you'd worked with in the past when they talk about brand equity, they talk about deposits and withdrawals.
Yeah.
Could you articulate that? Because when I was hearing you speak about that, I thought, wow, I mean, it makes a lot of sense when you hear it, but I don't think a lot of people have heard that analogy before. Yeah. Could you talk us through what that looks like?
Yeah, for sure. So that was actually Ralph Lauren who told me that.
Okay. Yeah.
So I had the distinct pleasure and honor of spending about 90 minutes with Ralph, and that was probably 10, 12 years ago now. I was interviewing for a job that he told me I was no good for in the first 2 minutes. It was the best rejection I've ever had, actually. He said, I really like you, and there's definitely a job for you at Ralph Lauren. It's just not this one.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay. Well, end of meeting. I was like, well, okay. Thanks very much, Ralph. Like, yeah, thanks for your time. He's like, no, let's stay. Let's chat. And I was like, great.
That's cool. That's even better.
Yeah, it's way better. And I just finished at Thom, and Thom Browne had worked for Ralph. So he wanted to hear about Thom and how he was going and how we did what we did with Thom. And so it turned into this long chat. Long story short, he asked me about my thinking or my intellectual framework for branding. And of course I gave him a 3-minute answer because I'm incapable of short answers. I said, well, how do you think about it, Ralph? And he said, deposits and withdrawals. And I was like, great answer. And so then we started riffing on, well, what does he mean by that? Deposits, it's the runway shows, it's the catwalk shows, it's celebrity endorsement, it's collaborations with influencers, it's the mansion on Madison Avenue, it's the car collection, et cetera, et cetera. Withdrawals is the, 8 million polo shirts that they sell in New Jersey every year. So the idea is that if you build up sufficient brand equity, you are entitled to, and I would say obligated to, withdraw. So the whole idea of building brand equity through deposits is that you can elegantly and artfully make withdrawals tactically when you need to. So when you see brands that are constantly on sale and they don't really stand for anything terribly much and you can't really articulate their promise, and it cheapens whatever perception you had of the brand is eroded over time. You just wait for the next sale.
Yeah.
On the flip side, when you see a premium brand that rarely go on sale, you feel like it's a privilege. Like I'm lucky, right? Here's an opportunity for me to buy into this incredible brand at a slight discount because they're celebrating their birthday or it's, Black Friday, whatever it is. So the more you think about deposits and withdrawals and the necessity of getting that balance right, the simpler brand and marketing activity becomes and the more elegant your price promotion activity can be because you're doing it on the basis that you've already established respect and credibility and trust with your customer. In other words, suddenly selling it for 20% less is not an insult. It's kind of a compliment that you're inviting them into this world at a slight discount to what they would normally get. And that world is still incredibly exciting because of all the deposits they've made.
So how do you think about when it comes to, briefing like one of your new clients about like the push and pull of marketing and advertising? How do you what are the distinctions between the two for those that have never heard about, how you can push and pull when it comes to marketing, advertising and brand?
In terms of price?
Just in terms of in what way, what is a pull look like when you're pulling customers in versus a push method?
Yeah, right. Got it. Okay. So look, the brand, there's a great sort of gravitational force around brand. So brand acts to pull you in. So it is not, I'm not being pushed. I'm engaging in a narrative, great branding. So a brand is a promise of a better life. Great marketing is a narrative that takes that character, that persona of the brand on a journey. So that the character remains consistent in terms of core values, in terms of core promise, but they go on this journey and you want to go with them on that journey because it's interesting and it evolves and is different from season to season. So that's drawing me into the brand's narrative. It's pulling me into their world. That's enough often, but not always. So marketing's job is then to sort of push me along a bit. So top of the funnel marketing, typically brand level marketing, that's all about pull. Mid-level marketing, sort of campaign, make it real, out in the wild. What does it look in the real world stuff? That's actually a balance between push and pull.
Yeah.
And then performance marketing, what most people now talk about when they're talking about digital marketing, they're just talking about bottom of the funnel performance marketing.
Exactly.
That's a push. Now, like in any relationship, whether it's platonic, romantic, or business, no one wants to be pushed.
Yeah.
You want to be drawn in.
Yeah.
Now, if you need a tinsy little push it, it's such an inappropriate way to describe it, and forgive me, but I'll just be on PC for a second. But if you're romantically engaged with someone and that dance that you're engaged in, the flirtation, you're getting to know each other, you're being pulled into their world. If after a period of time they lean in and kiss you, it feels very welcome. It's something that you've been waiting for, you've been anticipating for, you're completely ready for. On the flip side, if there was no romance, if it was a very brief encounter and you were still trying to figure out if you're interested and someone started leaning in and trying to kiss you, it could feel quite offensive. In fact, it would feel a bit like an assault.
Yeah.
And it's no different. Marketing can feel like an assault. Like if it's all bottom of the funnel, push, 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 push.
Yeah.
at a certain point, people you get the ick.
Yeah.
It's a bit much.
What's your thoughts on when it comes to like super aggressive marketing from someone like a Temu coming into Australia? What's your thoughts of someone that's such like a big brand advocate?
So to me, Temu is not a brand.
Yeah.
It's a product and price point. It's a fabulous service. It's a logistics solution. It is not a brand.
Not at all.
Not in the way I think of brands.
So what can brands that, let's just say these things, right? There's homeware brands that might source really good quality ones of these that are, ceramic and really good quality. What do you do when you're a brand going up against the category that Temu and Wish and the likes of them are your direct competitors selling for a fifth of the price? What's your play when you're up against the Temus of the world in your category?
So that ties in beautifully to your last question, because it has to be a brand. It cannot be about product and price point. If you're selling on physical attributes, so features and benefits of the physical product, price, or any kind of service like convenience, overnight delivery, whatever, you're not selling a brand. You're selling a product, a price point, and some kind of logistics solution. Temu's really good at that. They're kind of unbeatable at that. If you're competing on price and convenience, you're in all sorts of trouble. You have to find a way to engage the consumer in your high purpose. I know I keep coming back to that, but whatever the brand stands for in terms of the promise of a better life, the way that you articulate that and make that inspiring and engaging through your own content and through influencers and collabs and drops and limited edition and all the rest of it, you're creating the notion that this brand presents a worldview that I want to be a part of. So yeah, I could save a few bucks, but then I wouldn't have a story to tell my friends. I mean, the great brands get you so engaged in their story that you ultimately want to share this story with others, because it's so engaging and so exciting. And it says something about you when you buy that watch or that car or that laptop or that outfit or that house or whatever it is. You are saying to yourself, I've made it because I'm good enough to now be part of this world. And you're saying to everyone around you, I am successful enough and I value myself enough that I value the environment enough or the production quality enough or whatever else it is that I'm choosing the better option. Now, there's a good chunk of consumers that just don't care, and they will be attracted to Temu all day long. They must not be your target market.
Mm-hmm. Now, there can be some benefits of having, not a massive budget. I feel like I was having a conversation with, we've done so many podcasts recently, with all the tariffs in the US.
Yeah.
One of the biggest spenders is Temu in terms of paid ads. With all that stuff, they cut it and all their sales completely fully dropped when they turned off paid spend. So they were completely reliant on forcing that paid spend, and they can get really lazy when you have really big budgets. But sometimes resource constraints can force creativity.
Totally.
Is there a moment in your career that you can think back to a time that actually having a smaller budget ended up you creating or building something better?
100%. So there's a bit of a cliche in the design world that creativity loves constraints. So, anyone can design a beautiful $1,500 dress. Can we design a beautiful $300 dress? Anyone can design a sports car for $1 million. Can we do one for $200? Like, creativity loves constraints. Without constraints, it becomes self-indulgent and it becomes art. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if we're talking about combining art and commerce, you have to have some constraints. I can give you a bunch of examples. Probably the best example I can think of is Thom Browne. So, we had absolutely no money whatsoever, and we rallied the troops and we developed a collection and sampled it on credit that we pre-sold to Barney's with a 50% deposit that we used to put back into some of the creditors who were most aggressive in threatening bankruptcy. That collection that we called at the time the red, white, and blue collection, because it had the red, white, and blue gauze grain and it had the 4 stripes. That's become the iconic.
Wow.
Thom Browne is now red, white, and blue and the 4 stripes. That became the brand. So, and Tom was using it before, but we used it in a much more focused way, and we developed it in a collection that was more commercial. It was more wearable and it was cheaper. Still expensive, but not luxury level expensive. Yep. And we sold it into Barney's. But the success of Barney's then led to a bunch of other locations in North America and Japan, ultimately in China. Anyway, my point is that Tom and the team would not have done that if they had the money. They would have continued to pursue $8,000 sweaters and $20,000 suits and $1 million runway shows and all the rest of it. Because we had to, the reconciliation there for Thom was, it's got to be true to Thom Browne. I'm not doing some rubbish design and crappy quality production that anyone could do. It has to look and feel and stand the test of time like Thom Browne, but it has to be done at a price point. Because we're having this conversation. I was, whatever I was, 32 or something at the time. And I said, this is really early on. I was like, who's the customer? And he said, you. And I said, well, that's interesting, Thom, because I can't afford anything in your store, nothing. And you pay me well.
Yeah.
But you need to be earning millions of dollars a year to shop here. So he's like, right. So I was like, how about we design a collection for me? Hey, if I am the customer, let's do a weekend bag. Let's think about, okay, I've got a date on Saturday night. I'm going to do some sport on Saturday. I'm catching up with the in-laws on Sunday. Fill my bag. Stuff that I can actually afford.
Yeah.
And that was the genesis of what we ended up calling the Red, White and Blue collection. And now it's just Thom Browne. That never would have happened if we were not absolutely up against the wall with a gun to our head.
Yeah.
And the great thing that Thom recognized, that I would encourage anyone in this situation to recognize, is when you're up against the wall with a gun to head, that is not a time to give up your values. It's not a time to give up your promise. It's not a time to give up your higher purpose, because then you're Timu and you're out of business. It's a time to lean harder, but challenge yourself. How can I do this for less? How can I do this faster? How can I do this with partners that will pay for it on 90-day terms? So by the time I'm cash flow positive, like, you get really creative.
100%. I love that's a better example than I could have even imagined you would give. We'll start to wrap up. Before we do, I want to finish on some like leadership and mindset stuff. I think like the mental health journey for entrepreneurs is like half of the game, right? Before we get into some leadership stuff, I want to know in terms of that like mindset piece, trying to unlock more. There's always this one hard truth that often is like a limiting belief, or it holds entrepreneurs back, whether it's often subconscious until it isn't, until it burns you and then it becomes conscious. What was one of those things for you, and what did, facing that fear or having that uncomfortable conversation with yourself and looking yourself in the mirror, what was that one thing that you had to confront and change, and how did your business and life improve afterwards?
Wow, that is a great question, one I've never been asked. I think that for me, it was this ultimately wrong belief that if I was smart enough, I could figure it out on my own. And I grew up on Westerns. I thought the lone gunslinger was the coolest guy ever. Ride into town alone, shoot it up, ride back out of town alone. I can do this all on my own. I'm smart enough. I work hard enough. I'm resilient enough. I don't need anyone else. And to the extent that I was having people tap me on the shoulder and suggest otherwise, I tuned them out. And I think that was a very big mistake and had very significant consequences. The implication of coming to that recognition that it doesn't matter if you're really smart at one thing. Business is a whole bunch of different things. And there are a whole bunch of other people who are smarter than you are at a whole bunch of other things. And a company, by definition, I mean, the genesis of that word, it's a group of, or it was originally a group of men. Now it's a group of people, right? So that word comes from, it's a collective. And it requires a collective to succeed at anything close to the level we want to succeed. How did that impact my life? I mean, it was pretty profound. I mean, it changed my approach to leadership. It changed my approach to recruitment. I thought what I wanted in direct reports at one point, this is really early in my career, who would do whatever I say. And I discovered what I really want is people who question me and who have their own ideas.
Such a flip perspective.
It's totally, I wanted I was Trump. I wanted loyalty.
Don't ask too many questions.
Don't question me. Very, very big mistake. And I think it's translated into the way the relationship I have with my wife. I think it's translated the relationship I have with my kids. I think it's translated the relationship I have with my friends. There's just a humility that comes from realizing that we can't do it alone. We weren't designed to do it alone, and it's no fun doing it alone. The more you share the burden and the more you share the success and the celebration, the better it feels.
Agreed. Off the back of that, again, another question to put you really on the spot here. What's, in terms of leadership, like what's the most challenging moment or the darkest moments you had to face in leadership? And what did that teach you that success never could have?
I think I would probably hark back to Thom Browne again. I think we were at the point where this is this is probably 3 months into my tenure as CEO. We had, honestly, a mafia connected factory in New Jersey who we owed millions of dollars to.
Not a place you want to be in.
I mean, honestly, people think I'm exaggerating, but it was real. We had meeting after meeting with investors. We were getting polite no's and sometimes fairly impolite no's. We had gone all the way to the altar with one investor who had burnt us at the finish line, and we just had a cash offer on the table from an investor who wanted to completely change the brand and make it cheaper and a department store mass market thing that would have got us out of all debt, given Thom $1 million a year salary, et cetera, and he turned it down. And we were going back to the office, and there was a part of me that was like, I am so impressed with you. Like, that's just, what a dude, like just massive balls and incredible conviction. And and another part of me was like, what have we done? I was like, oh my God, I've had one sort of notable success in my whole career, and now I'm going to be the guy that tanked Thom Browne. And so I think the learning from that is that I think it's a bit like what we just touched on before. When you're absolutely backed into a corner and you have, you're being assailed on all sides and you more or less have a gun to your head, at that point in time, capitulation is the absolute worst thing you can do. You either stick to your guns or you go down. And I think I'm a big believer in that. I don't think, people talk about a pivot. I'm not talking about a pivot. I'm talking, because that's a whole different discussion. I'm talking about compromising on your core purpose, your core brand promise, in order to paper over some more cracks and get some more money in the bank. That is the beginning of the end. And you may last another 3 months or 6 months or 12 months, but it is the end of what it was. It might be a new beginning, but normally it's just the end.
So what do you do when you're the CEO, the founder of the business, all the pressure is on your shoulders, customers, debts, credit cards, whatever? How do you stay clear-headed in these moments? And maybe this isn't necessarily you, but advice you could give to someone else. How do you stay clear-headed in the moments when all your brain wants to do is spiral and you want to run away?
Yeah. I think it's, for me personally, and in what I've seen in my client base, those that have successfully navigated periods of extreme challenge doesn't come close to describing it. I think those who have successfully emerged from that and gone on to bigger and better things, they have some version of what we touched on earlier in the discussion. They have a routine. They have a practice of some description that they return to still their mind, to tune out the stress, to reground them. They also have the benefit of a very clear purpose. And you could call it high purpose, or you could just call it brand promise. You could call it whatever you like, but they're driven by something that it's bigger than all this. So, money goes up and down, people come and go, the great high turns into the nightmare high. These things are inevitable. And in fact, I actually think they're pretty damn important to maturing as a leader. So I think if you don't have these things, you won't know what you're capable of.
Well, you're missing out on the whole point of everything,
Totally.
The whole experience of being a human being, right? Yeah.
100%. You won't know what you're truly capable of until you face that kind of adversity, and no one else will either. So I think it's not something to avoid if you could, and you can't. And when it happens, you embrace the challenge, and that the mindset becomes, what can I learn from this? What is this destined to teach me? How can this serve me? All those kind of questions that you can hear and you go, oh, well, that's just psychobabble bullshit. It's not. You invert the why is this happening to me to what can I learn from this? And the brain just switches gears. And it's like, oh, good question.
But it is as easy as a perspective shift. I was talking about this legit. I said almost the exact same thing yesterday with Don until changing the perspective from life is happening to me to life is happening for me.
Yeah.
It's just that simple. And like you can hear it and you might hear it 5 times and you'll think, what a load of bullshit. Like you said, easy for you to say, but then there'll become a time in your life when you're ready to hear it and you only need to hear it that one more time and it will all make sense.
Yes.
And one that clicks and you can have that perspective. You're always going to go through ups and downs and challenges, but those low moments when you can always look for, okay, what's the lesson? I'm meant to experience this for some reason that maybe you're conscious of right now, maybe you're not, but trusting the process, because what's the alternative? Thinking it's all random and, you're unlucky and what's the alternative mindset? Like, I don't understand why someone wouldn't want to try and craft a mindset like that.
100%. And there really is no alternative. If you give up, if you capitulate, if you surrender, you will never respect yourself ever again.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. And I think that's the thing that, at the end of the day, final two questions, it kind of brings me onto my second last question. Now, there are thousands of people that be listening to this podcast that, have the dream to build their own business, to create their own brand, but they're paralyzed by self-doubt or the fear of failure, the fear of rejection. What would you say to them, or an earlier version of yourself that hadn't yet made that leap?
I just keep coming back to, you think you've got a lot to lose, but you don't. The where you are, you're unhappy with. Something has to change. So why wouldn't you? I think to a certain, I have real empathy for it. I don't want to sound like I'm unempathetic to that mindset, but I think by default, I've always taken the opposite. It's like, so people are going to laugh at me. So people are going to think I made a bad decision. So I'm going to lose the money that I have, whatever it is. It's like, so what? I am going to learn so much. I'm going to meet so many new people. They're all going to see how hard I worked and how hard I tried and how resilient I am in getting back up and having a go. Do you know there's a whole bunch of VC firms in the US that will not invest in a first-time founder, and their preference is for a founder who failed and failed badly. They want to know what he or she learned from it.
Yep.
And they want to understand how they are going to solve for that problem going forward. But they do not want to invest in a first-time founder because he or she has no idea how tough it's going to be. So your failure could be the beginning of a whole new thing that gets VC backing from someone who wouldn't talk to you your first go around. Who knows?
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, sheer grit, determination, and resilience will yield a better than worst case outcome. And the worst case outcome is that you will be freed up to pursue another opportunity.
And I think one thing I'd like to add to that is you mentioned you think you have a lot to lose, but you don't. And it brings me back to my experience, because I know there will be a lot of people in their, say, mid-20s, early 20s that are in that stage where they don't have a mortgage, they don't have a family. Yes, they might have saved 20, 30, 40, 50 grand in the bank account, and they think, oh my God, I have to protect this. But it takes me back to my experience, and people always said this same thing to me. When I started Happy Skin Co, I put 10 grand in of my own cash. We did 10 grand each. I put 10 grand in my cash. By the time I put 10 grand in, I had less than $1,000 in my bank account.
Yeah.
And people say, Dylan, how could you do that? Wasn't that such a big risk? And I said, but how was it a risk? I was already living that life. If I continued doing that, I saw what the people that were working with me that maybe 5 years ahead, I saw what their lives like and I saw how happy they were. I already knew I was unhappy in this life. So if I wanted to make a change for that, you're never going to completely change realities and change, timelines that you're on by doing what you've always done.
Yeah.
You need to take a risk. You need to take a gamble. And worst case is you come back to that same position you started.
100%.
What's holding you back? And I think the people that have been thinking about this long enough and they won't take that leap of faith, and this is going to sound savage, but maybe business isn't for you.
100%.
And that's fine.
100%.
But stop telling yourself that it is.
Yeah.
And they're not trying it. Try it and fail. The amount, and another thing to add on to your point, the amount of people, the success rate when I mentor people on, if we do, whether they've tried one before coming to me for an e-com brand and failed, or, we've done one product together, it didn't quite work, and we, pick a new product to start again. The success rate on second businesses is, I don't have the statistics from my own experience, is dramatically higher.
Totally.
Because you have the context and the lessons, what you learn from what are you going to do
100%.
differently. So I think it's really important. But the biggest thing is if you really want it and if you want a different reality, you have to do things you've never done before.
Exactly. And just don't die wondering.
100%. 100%.
We've got such a short stint
here. It goes quick. Years ago, I was 24.
You're telling me.
I started this business when I was 24. I'm 32 later this year. It's like, where is the best part of a decade gone?
Where to go?
And final question. Now, let's just say this was the last podcast you were ever going to record and somehow every aspiring entrepreneur in the world was listening. What's one truth that you would want to leave them with?
Just start. My mind went through about 50 different answers, but what it boils down to is if you're an aspiring entrepreneur, meaning you are not yet an entrepreneur, stop aspiring. Start doing. Just start.
Great listening on that. But perfect. I think perfect way to end it. And then for everyone that's listened to this podcast, thought, wow, this guy knows so much, I want to follow along. Where's the best place that people can find you online, Instagram, website? Where's the best place that they can find you and connect?
So the probably best website is togetherthestudio.com.
Yeah.
In terms of Insta, Joshua J. Sparks.
Yeah.
And reach out to me via DM on Insta, LinkedIn, Joshua Sparks.
And you were just saying you're going to start getting into
I'm
the
kind
context.
of rubbish at this.
You're going to start like you've got so much up here. All you need to do is film it and put it out.
Look, Dylan, I if I can be a 10th as good as you are at actually getting myself out there, it'll be a 10,000% improvement on what I've done so far.
Well, yeah, I think for someone with your experience, it won't take long. Like you didn't like, and just so people clear, Josh didn't know any single question I was going to ask, and I could listen to you speak about business and marketing and spirituality for hours and hours and hours. Go follow Josh. He's going to start putting out content. He said he will, but he's just a brilliant man. Go follow along, and an amazing resource. I'm sure you'll get lots of information, value out of him in the future. Thank you again. We'll do another one next year if you're keen.
Can't wait.
Make it an annual thing. But thanks so much, and thanks for being so open and sharing everything you did.
Dylan, my pleasure. That was an awesome conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, guys, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode or you got something out of it, do yourself a favor, do me a favor, do your friends a favor and share this with them, and they can come along on this journey with us. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.